what that gives you is the same sort of setup as you get in comfort mode. I'm gonna have to turn around here, otherwise I'll get lost, and I do not want to get lost in the desert. Yeah, that's the desert. This one, the Atacama Desert in Chile, the driest desert in the world, no less. Want to see what happened when we turned up? Yep, it rained too. Unbelievable. 30 hours it took to get there. So this is the brand new Audi Q8, and it's the company's answer to a question that nobody asked until they saw the BMW X6. I'm not talking about this one, I'm talking about this one. What happened was a car with half the practicality of a proper SUV and none of the beauty of a coupe. Nonetheless, people bought into this idea, and lots of them at that. So much so that Mercedes does one too now, called the GLE Coupé. And so, of course, Audi just had to get in on this monstrosity party too. But out in Chile, I had a word with the lead designer of the Q8 and asked him whether Audi thought about going down the GLE Coupé or the X6 route of a really slopey back roof. And he laughed and said, "Nine!" Because what they've tried to do here is give it a sort of hunkered down wide look rather than a sort of coupe-like slanty back look. The benefit of that, of course, is it means it's got really good headroom at the back, certainly far better than you get in an X6. Although that's mostly a trick of the headroom. The Q8 is actually longer, taller and wider than an X6, although it has a marginally shorter wheelbase. It also has a slightly bigger boot than the BMW, but it's far from a giant on the road. Part of the appeal of the X6, actually the majority of the appeal of the X6 I reckon, is the sheer ludicrous bulk and aggression of the thing. And they're qualities that the Q8 here just doesn't really have. It's almost reserved by comparison, discreet almost. Audi don't seem to have made the mistake of trying to make this too sporty. They might say all that nonsense about how it's like the original Quattro. That is, this thing. It's a metaphorical and a literal stretch, I agree, but you can see hints of Audi's iconic coupe from the 80s in the Q8, especially at the flanks, if you squint a bit. But actually, that's really just a stylistic thing. What this does feel like is a slightly edgier, but still very comfortable Q7. It's an obvious thing to say, but it's true. Apart from the space benefits, the design of the Q8 also makes it an altogether classier proposition than its direct rivals. A theme that continues in the cabin. The cabin is almost identical to the A7's, but that's no bad thing because the A7 has one of the best cabins ever committed to a production car. What they've managed to do is make it look simple and classy, but most importantly, intuitive. So you've got your virtual cockpit there in front of you, and the top screen's for navigation, infotainment, car settings, stuff like that. And the bottom one is for temperature settings and heated seats and all that luxury stuff. This being Audi's flagship SUV, it of course sits at the top of the tree when it comes to equipment, and it follows price. The 8 part of the name is not only important because it's 1 louder than 7, as in Q7, but also because Audi wants you to associate it with its other top-end stuff, namely the A8 and of course the R8. Pricing and spec aren't actually confirmed as I stand here, the car doesn't come out till September, but when it does arrive you'll see that the starting price is around the 65 grand mark, and that's for a diesel S-Line with all this stuff. But it only has 5 seats, while the considerably cheaper Q7 has 7. And actually, as pretty as this thing is, for an SUV anyway, that distinct lack of ugly aggression might be a disadvantage for it in this part of the market. But hey, it's good to drive, mostly. There was a pretty big gap between me putting my foot down and the car actually going. Unfortunately, what that means is that the throttle response in this seems like it's the same as the throttle response in the A7. So like the first 50% of travel, car doesn't really do much, and then bosh, off it goes. And that just makes like normal, gentle driving a bit clunkier and a bit more difficult than it really should be. Probably reserve proper judgment on that until we get the car back into the UK, because it's quite disorienting driving on these roads. But what I would say, this really does feel like they've nailed that balance between something that is big and comfortable and luxurious and something that can actually be
passably enjoyable. Now there's a couple of things that Audi have done to make that happen. The first one is that there's two optional suspension setups, standard air suspension or sporty air suspension. So they're mechanically the same system, just have air chambers instead of physical springs. There is an overlap, but if you spec sports adaptive damping, then generally all the settings are firmer. The other thing this has is four-wheel steering. Again, it's optional, but what that means is that at certain speeds, the back wheels will turn up to, I think, 5 degrees in the opposite direction of the fronts, and that makes everything feel much sharper. And then for stability reasons, when you're going at higher speeds, the back wheels will turn the same direction.
You just want a quiet, comfy and classy Uber SUV. In that case, the Q8 here will tick all of your boxes.
Ergonomically, this is absolutely spot on. It's got that feeling of like the steering wheel and the dashboard being quite high, you sitting down quite low. It's really good. Generally speaking, this is really quiet, especially with this engine. This is the 55 3-litre TFSI. Honestly, when it settles down, it is so quiet. Even when you put your foot down, just a distant, smooth thrum.
Yes, the engines. Two badged 50 and 55, meaning diesel and petrol respectively, and both 3-litre 6 cylinders. It's the petrol one that is the quietest and the most refined, and the one that you'll actually want to buy. But as usual, the economy and the relative refinement of the diesel will probably push you in that direction when it comes to making a sensible purchase decision. Both get an automatic gearbox. In the diesel's case, it's a Tiptronic, and in the petrol's case, it's an S-Tronic, which is a twin clutch automatic and is marginally better.
Ride quality, this car has standard air suspension. Tempered by the fact that I'm on these super smooth Chilean roads, seems really good. Body control's excellent. It's still comfortable, but it has that edge of sportiness, so you can sort of feel a little bit of what's going on underneath you. It does seem like it rides better than the A7, which is a good thing, because I don't think the A7 rides very well at all generally.
And so the Q8 is very good. Very practical, obviously. And again, it looks nice. And of course, because it's an Audi, it's very well made. This side of a Bentley or something daft like that, this is probably the nicest SUV cabin on the market. And personally, I would take one of these over an X6 or a GLA Coupé any day of the year. What I would say though, before I go, is this. As usual, it's Land Rover that's going to rock up and ruin the SUV hoedown for Audi. Why? Well, the Range Rover Sport might be common as muck and lack the cabin ambience of the Q8 and the quality, but it's a little bit cheaper and it has 7 seats. Oh, and a much bigger boot. And then the next thing I would say is Range Rover Velar, which is 20 grand cheaper. Make of that what you will. And then I'd say goodbye because we've run out of time. More on the Q8 and all of the posh SUVs over at HonestJohn.co.uk as usual. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already, leave a comment below, and I'll see you soon. Bye!